Hello, you nice people. Thank you for showing up. I look forward to this time. We meet every Wednesday at noon Pacific time. But before we get into today's subject, a couple of interesting announcements. We're having a series in the fall called the Master Keys of Healing. It's an 8-week webinar series that will go very deep into how healing happens. There's an early bird discount for that. That's due good until August 15th. So go to my website, alancohen.com. I'd love to have you join us for the 8-week webinar series. We also have my coaching room that is free every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, and my life coach training that starts September 1st. So all those exciting things are coming up, and I want you to join me and go to my website, alancohen.com, to find out the details. Okay, for today, do you ever think that if something starts off on the wrong foot, it's going to be a disaster forever? Well, guess what? The universe has amazing ways to get things to work, even when you didn't think they were going to work or when they started off for, quote, bad reasons. Case in point, Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian author, was a gambler, and he ran into lots of gambling debts, and he had to find some way to pay them off. And so he decided he would write a book. And it was called War and Peace, which has become one of the great metaphysical and spiritual classics of all time. Maybe it's not metaphysical, but it's good literature. So isn't it interesting that he got into it through kind of a back door through paying off a gambling debt, which you might criticize or judge him for. But it was the universe's way of getting something wonderful to happen. So we can't really judge why something is happening. We may think it's a bad reason, but it might turn out to be a good reason. And if you're into Course in Miracles, the Course says that the ego gets stuff to happen for its own purposes, but the Holy Spirit or higher power can always flip it around and make things work for higher purposes. Another example, the internet was originally envisioned as a military tactic. And the idea is that if there was ever a nuclear war, there could be different command posts that would be knocked out, that would not be knocked out in case one central command post was. So that was one of the most cogent motivations for the internet. So something that started out as a tool of war ended up being a huge boon to humanity because it was co-opted for higher purposes. It's changed the way we do business, the way we communicate. Look at what's happening. You and I are meeting now over the internet, which originally was partially a tool of war. Isn't that interesting? And also, speaking of the internet, the original motivation for fast streaming was sex videos. That people who wanted to watch sex websites had high demand. They wanted to sell them to. And so the technology for streaming video was originally intended for sex videos, which of course has been co-opted to much higher and more noble purposes. So you could judge that. In a way, it's wrong, if you want to think it is. But in another way, it was actually motivation for something really, really, really good to happen. I mentioned this in one of my early daily doses, but I'll repeat it now because it's relevant. So I met a guy who was a Catholic man, and he was a spokesperson for the miracles that occurred in Garabandal, Spain, back in the 70s, I believe. There was a phenomenon where these 4 different children were woken up in their respective homes in the middle of the night, and they would go to this glen outside the village, this poor village, and the Mother Mary appeared to them and gave them guidance and healing and messages, and it became a huge phenomenon. People from all over the world came to receive these messages and get blessed. And it's still going on today. I don't think the apparitions are, but it's a holy pilgrimage site. Now, I asked this fellow who came and gave a lecture at my study group about this phenomenon. I said, "How did you get started doing this?" He said, "Well, I wasn't always a devout Catholic. I was born Catholic, but I didn't practice it." And he said, "I actually was kind of shy. but I used to tell dirty jokes. And I got a reputation for being a good off-color joke teller. And I began to be invited to speak at men's clubs and various meetings to do my comedy routine, which was kind of nasty, but it built a lot of confidence in me, and I got paid for it, and it was a stepping stone for me to speak up in public. He says, then I discovered this Garbandal miracle phenomenon, and I lost interest in my joke telling, and I really wanted to be an inspirer and an uplifter. And so now I go around to places all over the world and I show this film and I inspire people about these miracles. And it's my great delight to serve as a mission, as a missionary in that session. He says, but he said, if I hadn't got that experience telling dirty jokes, I don't think I would have had the confidence to do this. So what seemed to be a weird or nasty kind of thing in the beginning actually was a stepping stone for something wonderful. So once again, great spirit can take anything, anything, even stuff that starts off weird and turn it into something wonderful. I'll tell you a funny story now. It's a true story. So I had a friend named Hugh Prather. Some of you might remember Hugh. He wrote a book back in the 70s called Notes to Myself. It became well known. And he told this story, and I think I'll get the details right. If not, it'll just be a little off, but I think it's pretty accurate. So when Hugh was a young man, I think he was living in Arizona, he was living with a couple guys in an apartment house. And there were some girls living in an apartment down the road. And there was one really cute girl named Gail. And the guys in his apartment bet him that he could not get a date with Gail. And he said, okay, you're on. So he got a date with her. And they went out a few times and they liked each other. And the story goes like this. He said, well, we were going to this party one night and we're sitting outside the party in the car waiting to go in. And I said to her, what do you think? And she said, what do you mean, what do I think? And he said, well, think we should get married? She said, well, all right. True story. So they drove overnight. I think they went to Nevada. And they found some justices of the peace. They woke him up in the middle of the night. They said, we want to get married. And he married them in his pajamas. He was wearing pajamas while he performed the wedding ceremony. And they drove back to Arizona. And it was the morning by that time. And she got out of the car. He said, where are you going? She said, well, I'm going back to my apartment. He said, why are you doing that? He says, well, I have to figure out what to tell my boyfriend. So that was the start of the marriage, which is a really weird start. Funny, but weird. And they were married for many, many years, and they had their ups and downs. I think he admitted that he had several affairs, and they were living in different sides of the house for a long time. But he became a Course in Miracles student and teacher. And they had a reconciliation. And they really learned to love each other and ended up having a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful marriage for many, many years. They're very devoted to each other. And so something that started out in the oddest of ways turned out to have a miracle ending. Just because something does not fit your model of how something should start or even go along does not mean it can't end properly. The wonderful lesson from A Course in Miracles says, a happy outcome to all things is sure. A happy outcome to all things is sure. I'll tell you one more story. One of my coach graduates was married for a number of years. She had 2 children. And then her husband had an affair. And his girlfriend got pregnant. And by that time, he made up his mind that he wanted to be married again to his wife. And he came back and he apologized and he very contritely said that this was all over and he wasn't going to do it again. And would she take him back? And she did. She felt he was sincere. And then the girlfriend was emotionally unstable, and both the husband and wife were concerned about the welfare of this child. So they decided together that they would take the child in and raise the child as their own, which they have for a number of years now, and they have a lovely family. So, in spite of all the weird twists and turns in their marriage, it worked out. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody go have an affair, do anything illicit. That's not the point of the story. The point is that even though things get off to a rocky start or we make mistakes, all mistakes are correctable. In fact, when something gets off to a rocky start, it might be a good sign for this reason. In my coach training, we talk about what's called an extinction burst. An extinction burst is when if every time your dog whines and you give him a treat, and then you don't give him the treat, he's going to whine more and more and more. The negative behavior is going to exaggerate, and it looks worse. So, and then if you don't give him the treat, it will extinguish. It's an extinction burst. So it's the same thing with changes in our lives or starting of projects. So you may start a project or a relationship or a house move or a business. And at the beginning, you may have lots of challenges, but it's not necessarily because it's a wrong move. It could be that the old ego self, which is used to living in a very small quadrant, is now being challenged and threatened by you stepping into a bigger life. So, like a bratty child, when it doesn't get its way, the ego will cause upsets and emergencies and all kinds of challenges and problems that say you should not do this. But the truth is that if it's a healthy move, if you do not give in to the old whining, then something new and wonderful happen. Now, there is a caveat in that sometimes you get lots of challenges and it's guidance not to go ahead. You have to dig into your heart and dig into your spirit and ask your guidance, what's the truth about this? But the point for today is that you cannot judge an ending by the beginning. Many, many wonderful things have happened, many great relationships, businesses, creations, inventions, political changes, social changes have begun in odd ways that the ego would say, well, this is too weird, nothing good can come from this. But that's the ego's interpretation. The spirit's interpretation is that something good will always come from this. And even if it's a mistake that doesn't lead to anything great, if you learn from mistake and you would not do it again, then it was a positive experience. I coach lots of people, mostly women, who say, well, I got divorced a while back and it was a bad divorce. And it's been years now and I'd like to get back into a relationship. And I'm just afraid I'll make the same mistake. And I ask them, I say, are you the same person who married that original person? Oh, no way. I said, did you learn from the relationship and the divorce? Yes, I did. Have you learned and grown spiritually since the divorce? Yes, I have. Okay, then there's no reason to believe you would make the same mistake because you're not the same person who entered into that marriage and made the mistakes that ended that marriage. So what we want to do is achieve a paradigm shift. Course in Miracles is all about changing your perception. The situation can stay the same, but when you change your perception, the interpretation changes and your experience changes, and then very often the situation changes as well. So why don't we say we're always off to a great start? That's a good affirmation. I'm always off to a great start, even if appearances would indicate otherwise. And no matter how bad of a start you started, there's a great start that's ending. I'll tell you one more story. It's just coming to mind. It's one of my favorites of all time. I might have mentioned this before, but hey, it's a good one. So Mickey Mantle was the great baseball star when I was growing up. He was every kid's idol wanted to be Mickey Mantle, and he's an alcoholic, a lifelong alcoholic. And many years after he retired, I just happened to turn on the TV one day, and he was in Betty Ford Treatment Center, and he was dying of liver disease. And it was kind of sad because his face was gaunt, and he had his old Yankee baseball cap on. Didn't look like anything like the Mickey Mantle I knew as a boy. And he was having a press conference, and a reporter asked him, "How would you like the world to remember Mickey Mantle?" And he thought for a moment. He said, "I'd like them to remember that I finally made something of myself." And I was stunned because he was the biggest rock star of the day. For him to make something of himself, he was already made. But no, he was saying that he finally had spiritual growth after all his years of alcoholism. And he did pass away. And soon after he passed, there was a cartoon in the sports section of a newspaper. And it depicted Mickey Mantle walking in heaven down a path with God, who was depicted as a person. They had their arms around each other's waist. And Mickey said, "I sure made a lot of errors." God said to him, "Yeah, but you gave them a ninth inning they'll never forget." And so no matter how bad of a start we start, no matter how many errors we make, no matter how many twists and turns in our journey, there's always a way home. And we find that way home, the entire journey was worth it. Thank you for joining me. Love you lots. We'll see you next week. And so it is.